Hey guys, so what's been happening in the hobby this week? Well, today I thought we'd talk about the benefits of trying something new. You know, maybe a new subject matter in the hobby, a new faction or a new race, for instance, like something we've got in front of me, which we'll talk about in a second. Maybe it's a new technique, new painting style, just something new that you can try. And I've talked about these kinds of concepts before on the channel in my previous In the Hobby chats as well, the painting videos, you know, just going into those benefits, pros and cons of stepping outside the box and attempting something that might, you know, take you in a different direction in your hobby journey. And I think it's always healthy to try that. So, you know, you don't have to stay doggedly, to that new thing. You can always obviously incorporate everything that you know before, but it's just about learning something new and giving you a refresher, a little bit like doing those little in-between models that you might do between big projects to sort of refresh your mind and your eyes and get back on the ball again and, you know, and enjoy what you're doing. So if you start getting a bit burnt out. So we're going to talk about those concepts. And while we do that, my own hobby journey, I have never painted an elf of any kind in any, sci-fi or fantasy universe, you know, whatever miniature ever in over 30 years of being in this hobby. And I think it's about time I had a go at it. And the main reason for that is, one, to expand and broaden my horizons on on miniatures generally, and don't stay in that camp of elves are bad, and also because they suggest some different color schemes and some different approaches that might be fun to try. So that's what we're going to do today. So I'm going to be painting this Drukhari here, this space elf, and her name is Lelith Hesperax. I think I got that right. And yeah, I want to try a female. I think that's a great place to begin. And this is, you know, an edgy dark elf kind of character, so that's cool. And I can do a lot of dark colors. But I've been looking around at some cyberpunk imagery and sort of anime cyberpunk inspired images, artworks on Instagram and other places, and I've found a few colors that I really like, so we're going to be trying that. Some dark deep purples into magenta tones. I like magenta, so it's going to be there, but moving into sort of hot pinks and some neon colors, as you get a lot in cyberpunk sort of imagery, and even a little bit of, what else we got, some deep blue. So instead of black sort of armor and so on, we might do some like really dark blue armor. I noticed one particular artwork had sort of purples, yellows and pinks and those sorts of colors as the main colors, and then this really dark blue for some of the other elements in that artwork, and I thought that was a really nice combination. So we might try a little bit of that, and yeah, just basically play around with it and just have a bit of fun. Also, we're going to be using an airbrush in this particular one, so you'll see me, if I can set the camera up correctly, you'll see me get around and use an airbrush on this just for some of the base layers and start incorporating that in. We might even do some glazing with the airbrush as well, but we'll see how we go with that. But this is basically a bit of fun and just experiencing what it's like to paint an elf, because I've never done it. So yeah, I think that'll be a cool place to begin. So yeah, I guess we should get started, eh? So yeah, why might you, I guess, step outside your comfort zone? You know, why might that be important, or why would you even bother to consider, you know, let's say subject matter or things that might be a bit beyond what you would normally pick, and why might that be, you know, something like good to try, or any of those things? And I think really the answer to that is an individual one. But you know, just like with anything in life, personal growth usually comes from when you step outside your boundaries and you do something that's a bit uncomfortable. And normally speaking, that's when the learning happens, right? You know, if you're repeating a task, there is still learning going on there, but it's more of a refinement or a honing of skills and so on, and experiences. But when you step outside, you generally find that, you know, you have the greatest sort of learning experiences, whether they be failures or success. You know, you're going to experience more. So I guess that's the reason to do it, you know, in a nutshell, more or less. Quite obvious, I suppose, if you think about it. But you know, there comes a point in everyone's hobby journey, especially if we're going to focus on that for a minute and not general life, although this is, I guess, pertinent to general life as well. You know, you want to break out of it just purely from the fact of it's going to open you up to a few new types of ways of thinking about painting your models, and that's something really cool. As I said, I'm also utilizing art as a way to influence my color scheme. So if you find things like, you know, color schemes hard to come up with or think about, or you know, all that color theory is kind of daunting to you, well, one of the ways that you can get around that is by looking at other artists that produce artwork, paintings, sculptures, whatever it might be, or even other hobbyist painters that paint miniatures, and look at the colors that they're using. I've talked about this before, but it's a really good way to begin understanding about color theory. Even looking at companies like Games Workshop that produce their heavy metal promotional painted miniatures for their product photos, you can see the color schemes they're using. Even Space Marines is a great example, because all of those major chapters that they have are very, very carefully picked, the colors and the combination of colors and the spot colors they use for those. That what you'll find is that they're generally complementary colors. There's a lot of really good art fundamentals underpinning all of those color schemes, and it's why they're so appealing to look at, and why they're so loved by everyone, because they're in line with what art theory says we find appealing as human beings, right? When we look around the world and in nature and so on, there are certain underlying rules that make certain things, either appealing or repellent to us. And, part of that is in that color theory. So, you can just look at artworks that are successful, that you really vibe on. You think, oh yeah, that's great. Well, there's a reason for that. It probably has really good color theory underpinning it, and it's the colors that actually speak to you. So you'll notice, I've talked about this before, but you're going to be more drawn to certain color palettes than others. Certain colors you're going to like more than others, and there's sort of lots of, we can go into a deep dive on that, but basically you're going to be looking for colors that you like anyway, and then expanding on that. And when you're attacking a new subject matter like I'm doing here, like an elf, that's maybe outside of what you normally paint, it's going to give you some new ideas to help push that. And part of that might be to look at artworks and incorporate some of those ideas. But now you're tackling that thing of how much of a learning experience do you want this to be? As I suggested, this is going to be a fun experiment where I'm just going to be relaxed and having a bit of a go with it, and not really being too dogged to any one technique or one kind of application. So there is that to consider. But really, you get to decide that for yourself. In this case, for me, it's a refresher model. It's that sort of thing. Now, if I find that something in that process is really enjoyable as I'm playing around with this model, then I might continue that further, and that's where the real learning will begin. That aha moment. Oh, okay, this was a fun project. I really liked that little moment of it, so I'm going to explore that further, and I might do some more models in that way or in that style. But you can go full academic mode and just set it up as a learning experience from the start. So you're getting your resources in, your inspiration, different things that you're using, and you're approaching it in that way. A little bit like the way a display painter might paint a display miniature for a competition. Everything is considered, that sort of thing. But it's a different sort of feeling, and I wouldn't really suggest that for if you're first trying this out, to step outside your box. I think it should be a fun experience and something that's playful. So something where you're relaxed and there's no real emphasis on anything but just painting the miniature. Just like that in-between miniature that I talk about, that refresher model. It should be purely for the sake of painting it. That's probably the best experience you'll have with this type of process, and it's going to give you the most I think benefits ultimately, because you have nothing riding on it. You can just try things out and see what sticks and what doesn't. And if you need to go back to your old ways, by all means do it, because this is all meant to be fun, right? It's not meant to be a chore. So you just have a good time and enjoy that process, and try some new things if you want to. Like here, we're going to be using an airbrush to do a little bit of muck around sort of stuff, some underlying colors, maybe a little bit of glazing, just to mix up the process and see what's there. Now, if I find that, oh wow, this is great, well, we might explore that further, obviously on the channel, that sort of thing. But also personally, if it's you doing it at home, that process of adding an airbrush in might be something you've never done before, and that could be a fun experience to see how that goes, with your overall painting process. And you might find some cool little tricks there that help you out, and so then you can apply that later. Like for instance, if this color scheme on this elf is something that I like, or I like painting, I turn around and I say, what, Drukaria for me, I'm going to start painting. I'm going to do an army of them. I'm going to extrapolate this out now to a full army. Well, then we can look at that paint scheme, or I can look at that paint scheme and say, okay, what worked out of that? What's working? What are the processes I can use? How can I apply that now to an entire army and get an army done? And as you know, if you look at any of the trolls on my channel, if this is the first time you're listening to me or whatever, or those that have heard me before know all this sort of thing that I generally go on about, is that you always want to balance that finish with time management. Like, you don't want to have every model to be like an heavy metal standard model, and you don't want every model to be like a rushed model, right? You want to have somewhere in between that's got some efficient processes and some faster techniques, but also some moments where you can slow down and get some more involved techniques in there to help give you a better finish overall, so that you're happy with the result. Because that's I think the balance, the dance between all of those things. You're looking for a middle ground that's going to satisfy your expectation more or less, and give you something that you like, but isn't going to, let's say, take 5,000 years to achieve, right? That you want to always be balanced. At least from my personal point of view, it's better to finish that model than to leave it half done because you're so meticulously perfectionist at trying to do things that you just kill your own enjoyment and drive to do the thing. It's a cycle that many of us get into, right? We obsess over that perfection, and we never, it debilitates us and stops us from actually achieving anything. So you've got to sort of find a way to bypass that little loop and get yourself to the finish line, because that's going to help give you that satisfaction, that willpower, that endorphin hit, and so on, to do it again and repeat the process and get better and better and refine all of that. And these little in-between projects, like these little fun models and stuff where you don't have a lot of investment in it, is a great way to break up that loop, because your main army, the thing you love, you've got so much vested into it, so much money and time and so on, all of those things, that's hard to sort of step back from that process and look at it with fresh eyes. But with these sort of little models, these one-off ones, you can do that, right? So I guess that's sort of some of the benefits, or some of the initial kind of ideas that you can approach, and why doing something like this might be beneficial, because it could start you off down a whole new track, a whole new idea, a whole new perception of how you paint. It might suddenly, you might just go, you know what? I'm not into army painting at all. I like painting just single figures. And a lot of miniature painters get that way, and people in the hobby, and they realize they actually just really enjoy just just painting single models. And so they go down that display painting road, because they actually just prefer to just paint individual models. Some people go, you know what? I really, enjoyed this, but what I really want to see is 20 of these. I don't want to just have one. I want to have a little force. Because gaming is somewhere important to me. Or then, gaming is the most important thing, and I just really want to get these on the tabletop so I can go play with my friends and enjoy that interaction, because what's really important to me is that social interaction and the gaming side and that whole scene. Okay, so then let's peg back some of those more highbrow processes. Let's find a middle ground. Let's get that stuff done so I can get out there and actually enjoy the part of the hobby that I like most. So these kinds of little projects help you see that. You either enjoy that sitting there with that model doing it, or you don't, or you find some other third pathway that incorporates maybe both of those things, or neither. And so that's all the benefits of trying these sorts of things out, because it's a nice contained experiment for you. It's an experiment in fun, basically. That's what we're looking at. How can you create a fun experience with this hobby, and give yourself more of those moments of joy, because as we all know, the world is full of drama, and this hobby is all about a place that you can go to, a little bubble world that you can go to that's separate from all of that, where it's a nice meditative, calm, hopefully calm moment, where none of your inks and shade pots spill, and you have no messes, and everything is good, right? It's all good with the world, and for the most part, you do get to control all of that. Your little hobby space, the moment where you sit and you paint for that time, however long that is. That's a really controllable moment, and the more you become aware of how your process is, and you get into that I guess these are sort of things that artists think about, creatives think about, and the more of those sorts of I talk about this a lot, but becoming more aware of how you interact with this hobby and what you really get out of it and what's most important to you is great. It empowers you. It gives you way more control over that process, and hopefully will enable you to have more of it in your life rather than letting it slip, or that sort of thing, like having a little bit, there all the time. So it's kind of becomes like, your daily medication, from the rest of the world. It's very similar to, I often liken these types of creative processes to going to the gym or exercise or doing any kind of like physical activity that you might like to do. That's also really great for you and really important, right? Well, this creative, I guess, workout is also a really, really great thing for your mind and for your body and so on. You get that endorphin hit, the same thing like going to the gym or whatever. It's all really important stuff and worth your while to think about and explore. That I often talk about that, you're kind of like a creative mad scientist, and this is that little painting area that you've got, that hobby area, whatever you might call it, your studio. That's your experimental place where you make all of those Frankenstein monsters. Like that's the place, and you get to really dig into something that has really no other benefit really other than, I guess it does have a kind of survival benefit, but it makes your mind a lot happier, but ultimately it's not going to pay the bills or anything, or at least for most people it won't. All that stuff, it's just purely for the sake of joy of doing it, and that's something really special to human beings. I think we're out of all animals on the planet, we're the ones that engage in this act of play for the sake of play all the way through our life, to quite a deep and vigorous extent, right? We're good at it. We're good at doing this type of thing, and I think that there's a really good reason for that, because we're very aware of our own mortality and our own consciousness and so on, and it's a way for us to reconcile with some of the tensions that we have in our lives, right? So they're just a few things. I won't go too deep down that road. This is meant to be a fun video on painting a space elf, but just some things to think about, and I hope that watching me go through the process of painting this elf, at this point I don't know whether it's good or bad, or whether I've enjoyed myself or not, but we're about to find out. So I hope you've enjoyed it, and this little journey down the road of new beginnings and new ideas, and we'll see how I've gone and whether I have actually had fun, or any of these things that I've just talked about have actually occurred while I've been painting this, and what I think about elves, I guess, at the end. Okay, so there we are, one I guess space elf painted, the first one, or of any elf, in over 30 years. So let's take a look at Lelith and see what I've done. So when this started, I was thinking about cyberpunk and that sort of thing, and sort of getting inspired and trying something new, which I've done, but as I quickly started to paint this, and I did those airbrushing stages and got that color sketch down, I quickly realized that I really loved the colors that were there. I was originally going to paint over a lot of that, and then I realized I really liked the colors. And so even though it's still in the vein of a cyberpunk feeling, which sort of to me feels like very much like an Escher Gang kind of color scheme, I guess, with that yellow in the front there, I wanted to go with where the color was suggesting. So, going down that rabbit hole and exploring. So even though I started with one concept, it ended up with a slightly different one by the end. But I'm really happy with how this came out. So, it is fun painting an elf. I can admit that now, I think, finally, in all these years. So if you're hesitant about elves, it's okay. They're pretty fun. And I just wanted to do something pretty, right? Like, that was the idea. I wanted to use bright, nice, pinks and magentas and all those sorts of things. She's even, you can't really tell on this footage, but she's even got some blue lipstick on and a little bit of eyeshadow and so on. So like, I tried to really go for something fun and pretty, and do some blends. So you can see how I've just basically accentuated the airbrush stage and just like deepen the shadows and highlight it. But it's very painterly. I'm not worrying about like every single detail. It's just a nice, harmonious kind of paint scheme, a little bit like how I painted the Maggot King of Nurgle Black King model when I was talking about their battle tome, and I started from a blue-green base, and just built up that way from like a monochromatic sort of level, and then added the color, a little bit like the same way we're done here, except we use the airbrush. So yeah, all in all, I'm pretty happy, and and I think that it has achieved the goals that I set out to, and sort of the benefits of trying something new and so on. I think I've achieved that that, because this was fun and relatively fast. Only, you know, maybe about 6-7 hours, like basically a day's work to get this done. And you could extrapolate this out into a full army. You know, this paint scheme is pretty doable for an army. A few slight changes you'd have to make to make it more efficient over many models, but I think that with that airbrush stage and then the sort of more painterly approach, you could definitely do a color scheme like this on Dark Elder or Drukhari, and it would look really cool. But who knows, maybe in the future I'll do some more. But I'm really happy with how this one turned out, so I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll leave an image of her at the end, obviously, as I normally do, and you'll get the paint list and so on like I did at the start of the video. But otherwise, yeah, pretty fun. So there'll be more elves on the channel. We've got another one up soon. If you've seen that little community post, then you will have seen possibly what the next elf will be, if you've figured out what that blurry image in the background was. But otherwise, yeah, please hit that like button, subscribe button. It really helps me out, and I guess I'll catch you on the next one.